Outlaws attack weak old man. They freeze when they see his tribal tattoo. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The sun was already leaning low when they found him. A thin old man walking the dirt road with a sack over his shoulder and dust clinging to his boots like it had known him for years. He moved slow, the way men move when time has taken more than it ever gave back. Each step measured, each breath earned. The outlaws noticed him from the ridge, 5 silhouettes against the sky, bored and restless and looking for something easy to break. Out here, weakness showed like a lantern in the dark, and the old man shone bright. They rode down laughing, horses kicking up dry clouds, circling him the way wolves circle something already tired. He did not run. He did not reach for a weapon because he did not carry one. His hands were empty, his shoulders narrow, his eyes steady in a way that confused them. One of the men shoved him, hard enough to send the sack spilling into the road. Dried corn, a cracked tin cup, nothing worth stealing. The laughter grew sharper. Another grabbed the old man by the collar, fingers digging into cloth worn thin by years of sun and sweat. They called him names meant to remind him of his place. Old, weak, alone. He staggered but stayed on his feet, knees trembling, breath shallow, the desert wind tugging at his hair. A punch landed in his ribs, not meant to kill, just meant to hurt, just meant to prove something that did not need proving. The old man made no sound. That silence bothered them more than any scream could have. When the second shove came, rougher than the first, his shirt tore open down the side. Cloth ripped, skin showed, and then the world shifted. Ink darkened by age curved across his chest and shoulder, lines worn but unmistakable, a tribal mark old enough that only a few living men still knew its meaning. The laughter died mid-breath. One outlaw froze with his hands still raised. Another took a step back without realizing he had moved. The wind passed between them, carrying dust and memory. No one spoke. The old man stood there, chest exposed, ribs rising and falling, the mark catching the late light like it had been waiting for this moment. Their eyes locked on it, not in anger now, but in something closer to fear and recognition. The road felt suddenly smaller, the sky heavier. Whatever game they thought they were playing had just ended, and none of them were sure how or why, only that nothing would be the same once that mark had been seen. The outlaws did not know his name, and no one in that stretch of land ever asked for it, because the old man had lived there so long that he had become part of the scenery like a fence post or a dry tree bent by the wind. He stayed in a one-room shack set back from the road about a quarter mile where the ground turned rocky and nothing grew tall enough to cast a shadow. Folks passing through called him harmless when they noticed him at all, a thin figure moving slow at dawn or dusk, carrying water or firewood with the patience of someone who had learned not to rush life. He spoke little, and when he did his voice carried no anger, no pride, just a calm tone shaped by years of listening more than talking. Children from a nearby homestead once waved at him from a distance, and he raised his hand in return, never stepping closer, never frightening them with stories of the past. In town, the shopkeeper let him take what he could afford and never pressed him for more. Not out of kindness, but because the old man had a way of looking at people that made them feel seen and then forgotten just as quickly. He paid with coins wrapped in cloth, always counted carefully, always exact. No one saw him drink. No one saw him argue. No one remembered him asking for help. At night, a single lantern burned in his window, steady and low, as if he did not need much light to keep away whatever came in the dark. He slept on a narrow bed with a folded blanket and woke before the sun every morning without fail. His hands shook when the cold came, but they never fumbled. He walked the same paths every day, leaving tracks that vanished by noon. There were rumors once whispered by men who liked to talk after whiskey, had softened their sense that the old man had not always been old, that he had arrived decades earlier with nothing but a scarred horse and eyes too sharp for someone claiming peace. But rumors dry up when no one feeds them, and the old man gave nothing to grow on. He never explained the faint marks on his skin hidden beneath cloth worn smooth by years of use. He never told anyone why he kept his sleeves long even in the heat, or why he stood still sometimes, as if listening to voices the rest of the world could not hear. What the outlaws saw on the road was only what everyone else saw: weakness, bent shoulders, a body that would not fight back. They did not see the weight he carried that had nothing to do with age. They did not see the nights he had chosen silence over anger, or the miles he had walked away from bloodshed, because someone had once asked him to keep a promise. The land remembered, though. The wind that cut across the plains had passed over fires older than the town, and the dust beneath their boots had been stained long before any of them were born. When the old man stood there with his shirt torn and his mark exposed, he did not straighten or speak, because he had learned long ago that truth did not need a voice. He simply breathed and waited the same way he had waited all his life for others to decide who they were going to be when faced with something they could not undo. The pause did not last long, because cruelty hates silence, and one of the outlaws laughed to break it, a sharp, nervous sound that tried to turn fear back into control. He stepped forward again, boot grinding into the dirt, and shoved the old man once more, as if daring the world to disagree. "You think that mark scares us," he said, though his eyes never left it. The others joined in slower this time, their circle tightening, their voices louder than their courage. They grabbed the old man by the arms, twisting cloth and skin together, pulling him off balance, not to rob him, but to remind him of where power usually sat. His sack was kicked aside again, the tin cup rolling until it stopped against a rock. Someone slapped his hat from his head, and it landed upside down, filling with dust. They told him to kneel. They told him to beg. They told him that marks did not matter anymore, not out here, not now. The old man swayed, but did not fall. His knees bent, then straightened, as if memory rather than muscle held him upright. Another blow landed lower this time, meant to steal breath, not life, and the sound it made echoed farther than it should have across the open land. Still he did not cry out. His face tightened only for a moment, and then settled back into that same calm that had unsettled them from the start. That calm made the men angry. Anger is easier than doubt. They took turns now, pushing and striking, not hard enough to leave blood, not yet, but enough to satisfy their boredom. One of them circled behind, tugging the torn shirt wider, exposing more of the ink etched their dark and deliberate lines, shaped by hands that knew what they were doing. The mark was not decoration. It carried weight, even to those who pretended it did not. The leader stepped closer, squinting as if reading something he wished was written differently. He had seen that symbol once long ago, carved into a post at the edge of a place. Men did not enter twice. He had laughed then too, until someone else had not. He shook the thought away and raised his voice, calling the old man, nothing calling him less than nothing. He wanted the others to hear certainty. He wanted himself to hear it. But the desert does not lie, and neither does time. The wind shifted again, lifting dust across the road, and for a moment the men looked smaller, standing there crowding an old man who would not kneel. Their horses stamped, uneasy, sensing a change their riders refused to name. One outlaw spat near the old man's feet and told him this was his last chance. "Speak. Explain. Give us a reason." The old man lifted his eyes, then not in defiance, but in recognition, as if he had been waiting for the question rather than fearing it. He did not answer. He did not need to. The mark on his skin had already spoken in a language older than threats. The leader felt it, then a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with fear of a fight and everything to do with consequence. He thought of stories told low and never finished of men who crossed lines they did not see until it was too late. He thought of promises broken and debts unpaid. Around him, the laughter thinned, the circle loosened without anyone meaning it to. Hands that had been eager now hovered uncertain. No one struck again. The cruelty had reached its limit, not because the old man fought back, but because something deeper had stepped into the space between them. The old man stood there, breathing slow, shoulders still bent, eyes steady, and the outlaws realized too late that they had not chosen him at random after all. The moment stretched as the mark lay bare against the old man's skin, and the desert seemed to lean in closer, as if it recognized something the outlaws wished it did not. The ink was not fresh nor sharp-edged like the careless work of men chasing fear. It was aged, softened by years of sun and weather, yet every line held firm purpose. The curves followed paths that meant belonging, not dominance, and the spaces between them told a story of vows taken and kept. One outlaw took an unsteady step closer, his voice lowered despite himself as he tried to remember where he had seen it before. Not in town, not on wanted posters, not in any place that welcomed guns. It had been far from roads, far from law, carved into memory, beside firelight and silence. He remembered elders who did not raise their voices and warriors who did not boast. He remembered the rule that no one carried that mark without earning it, and no one harmed the bearer without answering to something larger than men. Another outlaw whispered a name of a tribe he had only heard spoken once and never again. The leader clenched his jaw, staring at the old man's chest, as if the lines might rearrange themselves into something easier to explain. He wanted to call it meaningless, but his body refused the lie. The mark was not a threat. It was a warning that arrived too late. The old man shifted his weight slowly, not to escape, not to fight, but to ease the ache in his bones. That small movement drew their eyes back to his face, and what they saw there unsettled them more than the ink. There was no triumph, no accusation, only a tired patience, as if he had known this moment would come and had accepted it long before any of them were born. The leader cleared his throat, then stopped himself. Words felt dangerous now. The wind lifted the torn edge of the shirt again, revealing more of the design, and with it the faint scar that crossed through it, evidence of a past wound taken without complaint. One outlaw removed his hat, holding it against his chest without knowing why. Another looked toward the horizon, as if measuring distance to a place that no longer mattered. The horses shifted and snorted, ears pinned, sensing fear their riders would not admit. The old man finally spoke, then not loud, not sharp, but steady enough to carry across the space they had made. He said nothing of names or deeds. He only said that he had been walking home. The simplicity of it cut deeper than any threat. Home meant protection. Home meant memory. Home meant people. The leader felt sweat gather beneath his collar despite the cooling air. He realized then that they were not the first to see that mark, and that every man who had before them had made a choice that followed him the rest of his days. The laughter from earlier felt like it belonged to someone else, now someone smaller and younger and dumber. No one moved to strike again. No one reached for a weapon. The cruelty that had fueled them bled away, leaving behind a hollow awareness that the old man's weakness had been an illusion born of distance and ignorance. The mark had done what guns could not. It had reminded them that power did not always announce itself, and that some histories stood quiet until forced into the light. The road lay open on either side, and for the first time since riding down from the ridge the outlaws understood they were the ones standing in the wrong place. The silence thickened until it felt heavier than the heat, and every man standing there became aware of his own breathing, as if it were too loud. No one knew who should move first, and that uncertainty settled like dust in their throats. The leader shifted his weight, and the leather of his belt creaked, an ordinary sound that suddenly felt like a shout. He glanced at the others, searching for agreement, and found only hesitation staring back at him. One outlaw swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving the mark, as if it might vanish if he blinked. Another took a step back, then stopped, embarrassed by his own instinct, and yet unable to step forward again. The old man did not fill the silence. He did not explain or threaten. He simply stood with his shoulders relaxed, letting the truth sit between them without decoration. The wind brushed across his exposed skin, and the ink seemed almost alive in the fading light, carrying the weight of every story tied to it. The leader felt a memory rise uninvited of a night long ago when he had been younger and poorer and had watched from a distance as men who wore that same symbol settled the dispute without drawing blood. He remembered how quickly the shouting had stopped then too. He remembered how his father had told him some debts were not collected with coins. The thought made his jaw tighten. He cleared his throat again, and this time words came, though they sounded smaller than he intended. He asked the old man who he was. The old man met his eyes, not challenging, not pleading, and said only that he was passing through as he always did. That answer did not satisfy the leader, but it did something else. It reminded him that the road did not belong to him. The outlaws glanced at one another, measuring pride against survival and finding pride the weaker of the two. One of them nudged the sack back toward the old man with the toe of his boot, not kindly, but no longer cruel. Another picked up the hat from the dirt, brushing it clean with a rough care, and held it out uncertain. The gesture broke something open. The leader felt the moment slipping away and understood that if he pushed now, there would be no turning back, not just from this road, but from everything that came after. He looked again at the mark, then at the old man's face, and saw not weakness but restraint. That restraint carried its own kind of authority. The horses shifted again, stamping impatient, and the sound felt like a warning bell. The leader nodded once, a small motion meant for his men more than for the old man. He stepped back, giving space without saying he was doing so. The others followed suit, each retreating half a pace, then another until the circle widened and the road breathed again. No one laughed. No one spoke. The old man bent slowly, retrieving his sack and setting the tin cup back inside. He took the hat and placed it on his head, adjusting it with care. The shirt hung torn and open, but he did not rush to close it. He allowed the mark to remain visible, a final reminder that the past was still present, whether invited or not. The leader mounted his horse, hands steady now, and turned it away from the old man. Before riding off, he looked back, once more meeting the old man's gaze, and giving a nod that carried more weight than any apology he could have offered. The old man returned nothing but a calm look, and that was enough. As the outlaws rode away, their figures shrinking against the open land, the tension drained from the air, leaving behind a quiet that felt earned. The old man waited until the sound of hooves faded completely, then turned and continued down the road, toward home, his steps slow, his breathing even carrying with him the knowledge that sometimes justice arrived not with force, but with the simple refusal to be erased. The old man did not hurry after they left, because there was no reason to outrun what had already passed. He walked until the road narrowed and the land dipped toward the low rocks, where his shack waited like it always had, patient and plain. As he moved, he drew the torn shirt closed, not out of shame, but habit, tying it with a strip of cloth he carried for such small repairs. The mark disappeared beneath fabric again, returning to the place it had lived for decades, unseen and undisturbed. He set his sack down inside the doorway and sat on the stool near the wall, letting the quiet settle around him. Only then did the weight of the moment press, and not as fear, but as memory. He had earned that mark long before age bent his back and slowed his step. Not through conquest or bloodshed, but through staying when leaving would have been easier. Years ago, when he was still strong enough to ride hard and sleep on stone, he had crossed into land that was not his, chasing nothing more than water and direction. He had been wounded, then fevered and lost, and it was the people of that tribe who found him, not as an enemy, but as a man close to death. They did not ask his name. They did not ask where he came from. They tended his wounds, fed him broth, and waited for him to breathe easier. When soldiers came later demanding answers, the tribe gave none, and the old man stood silent beside them, accepting the risk as his own. He stayed through winter, helping where he could, learning when to speak and when to listen. He watched children grow and elders pass, and he learned the weight of promises spoken without witnesses. When the time came for him to leave, the chief placed the mark upon him, not as ownership, but as kinship, a sign that some bonds did not end with distance. The old man had carried that bond quietly through years of wandering and labor, choosing work that kept him apart from crowds and stories that wanted heroes. He did not return because the world beyond needed him more than the tribe ever had. He carried their law instead, one that said strength was proven by restraint and justice by memory. Sitting there now, he poured water into his tin cup and drank slow, feeling the ache in his ribs ease with each breath. He thought of the outlaws not with anger, but with a weary understanding. They had not known what they were stepping into, just as he once had not known the cost of silence. The difference was that he had chosen to learn. He rose then and lit the lantern as the light faded outside, its glow steady and familiar. Tomorrow he would walk into town as he always did, and no one would mention the road or the men or the mark. Life would continue in small, exact ways, measured by coins and footsteps and dawns that came without asking. That was how he preferred it. The world did not need to know who he had been or what he had earned. It only needed him to keep walking, to keep choosing not to answer cruelty with the same language. Outside, the wind passed over the shack and moved on, carrying with it the knowledge that some justice never announced itself, and some identities were meant to remain hidden until the moment they were needed. The following morning arrived without ceremony, and the old man rose before the light, as he always did, moving through his routine with the same careful order that had shaped his days for years. He stepped outside and felt the cool air settle on his skin, steady and clean, and the land gave no sign that anything unusual had happened on the road the night before. He carried water from the barrel, stacked firewood, and set his small pot on the stove. When he walked toward town later that morning, the road lay empty and quiet, and the tracks from the outlaws' horses had already softened under the wind. By the time he reached the edge of town, the sun was higher, and the place moved at its usual pace, slow voices, doors opening, a wagon creaking past. The shopkeeper nodded as he always did, and the old man returned the gesture, placing his coins on the counter, counted and exact. No one asked him where he had been. No one mentioned the men who had ridden through at dusk. That silence was the first sign that justice had already begun to do its work. Later that day, word traveled without names attached to it, the way truth sometimes does when it wants to arrive gently. A group of outlaws had turned back sooner than expected. They had not taken what they planned. They had not made trouble in the next town or the one after. One man, who often drank too much, said they looked shaken, as if they had seen something that did not fit the stories they liked to tell themselves. The old man listened without reacting and kept walking. Justice did not need his attention anymore. It had passed from his hands to theirs, and that was where it belonged. That evening he sat on his stool outside the shack, watching the sky darken, and felt no need to hurry inside. The lantern remained unlit until night fully settled. Somewhere far off a coyote called, and then went quiet. He thought of the outlaws again, not with satisfaction, but with the calm certainty that comes when a lesson has been given without force. They would carry that mark in their memory long after the road had forgotten their footprints. They would measure their choices against that moment, whether they admitted it or not. The old man had not punished them, and that was the point. Punishment closes doors. Recognition opens them. He had shown them something they could not unsee, and then stepped aside. That was the justice he had learned all those years ago, and it was the only kind he still trusted. When the lantern finally glowed in his window, it was no brighter than usual, and no one came knocking. No riders returned. No voices rose in anger. The night passed clean and whole. The old man lay down and slept without dreams, and when morning came again, it came as it always had, bringing another day that asked nothing more of him than to keep living as he had chosen. Out here, justice did not ride in with guns or speeches. It moved quietly through moments when men were forced to face what they had forgotten and decide who they would be after that. The old man closed his eyes, knowing that the road would carry that memory farther than he ever could, and that was enough. Days passed, and the land settled back into its usual rhythm, as if it had gently folded the moment into itself and moved on. The old man continued his routine unchanged, waking before the light, tending his small patch of ground, and walking into town when supplies ran low. People noticed nothing different, except perhaps the way he seemed lighter in his step, as if a long-carried weight had finally been set down without ceremony. The road remained quiet, and no new riders came asking questions. A few travelers mentioned hearing stories further out about a group of men who had turned away from easy trouble and ridden hard in the opposite direction, choosing distance over conflict. The old man listened when such words drifted his way, and then let them pass. He had never believed in spreading lessons louder than they needed to be. One afternoon, a storm rolled in, sudden and brief, leaving the air clean and the earth dark with fresh scent. The old man stood in the doorway of his shack, watching rain fall across the road, and felt a calm satisfaction that had nothing to do with victory. He had not won anything. He had simply remained himself. When the rain stopped, he stepped out and righted a fence post the wind had loosened and returned inside to dry his hands. That night he sat with the lantern low and thought of the mark hidden beneath his shirt, not as a symbol of power, but as a reminder of responsibility. It had never belonged to him alone. It represented trust placed carefully and earned slowly, and it demanded restraint above all else. In the days that followed, a boy from a nearby homestead passed by more often, walking his dog along the road. He waved shyly, and the old man returned the gesture. No words were needed. The land did not feel as sharp anymore. Even the wind seemed gentler as it moved through the open spaces. The old man repaired his shirt with careful stitches, closing the tear, but not erasing the memory. He knew there would come a time when he would no longer walk that road or light that lantern, and that was all right. What mattered was that when tested, he had answered without adding more harm to a world already full of it. The outlaws would carry their own reckoning forward, making choices shaped by what they had seen, and that was their work now. The old man had done his part. As evening fell, he stepped outside once more and looked down the road, stretching into shadow and distance. It was just a road again, nothing more and nothing less. He turned back toward his home and closed the door behind him, leaving the night to itself. Out here, justice did not linger or demand recognition. It arrived quietly, did what it needed to do, and then moved on, leaving only a deeper stillness in its wake. The old man slept that night with the window open and the lantern dark, trusting the silence he had helped preserve, and knowing that sometimes the strongest ending is simply walking forward and letting the world learn what it must from what it has already seen. The years moved the way years always do, quietly and without asking permission, and the old man grew thinner and slower until one morning the road saw him walk it for the last time. No announcement marked the day and no crowd gathered because he had never lived for witnesses. The shopkeeper noticed when the coins no longer appeared on the counter, and a neighbor walked out to the small shack to find the lantern unlit and the door resting open to the breeze. Inside there was little to see: a folded blanket, a repaired shirt, a tin cup set clean on the table. The old man lay on his bed, hands crossed, breathing shallow but peaceful, as if sleep had simply decided to stay. When they buried him, they did so with care, placing him on a rise where the wind passed gently and the land looked wide and honest. No stone marked the place, only a small wooden post and silence. Days later, riders appeared at dawn, not as a threat, but as a line of figures moving slow and respectful across the plain. They dismounted some distance away and approached on foot, heads lowered, weapons left behind. At their front walked an elder whose hair was white and braided, whose eyes carried memory deeper than age. He knelt by the mound and touched the earth with his palm, then stood and spoke words few could understand, but all could feel. From beneath his robe, he drew a piece of cloth and unwrapped it, revealing a symbol carved in bone, matching the mark the old man had carried hidden beneath his shirt. He placed it at the foot of the grave and stepped back. No one spoke. They did not stay long. They did not explain themselves. By noon they were gone, and the land was quiet again. Weeks passed, and a traveler stopped at the rise, curious about the bone marker catching light in the sun. He knelt to read the small carving beneath it, and found no name, only a single line cut clean and simple, saying he walked with honor. The traveler stood and removed his hat, feeling something settle in his chest he could not name. He left the marker untouched. Somewhere far from that road, a group of former outlaws changed their paths without ever speaking of why. One became a ranch hand and learned to work without taking. Another left the territory entirely. The leader aged quickly, the memory of that mark staying with him like a shadow, reminding him that strength without restraint was just noise. None of them ever returned to that stretch of road. Back near the shack, a boy grew older and walked his dog past the rise every evening, tipping his hat without knowing exactly why. The wind moved through the grass, and the land held its quiet the way it always had. The story never became legend because legends need spectacle. This one needed only memory. Out here, justice did not shout or punish or demand repayment. It arrived when cruelty met something it could not bend and chose to step back. It arrived when a man who could have claimed power chose instead to carry dignity. The old man left nothing behind that could be stolen, and everything behind that mattered. And long after his footprints faded, the road remembered him not as weak or feared, but as proof that the strongest force on the frontier was not the gun or the fist, but the courage to stand still and let truth do the rest. Experience a powerful tale of dignity, restraint, and quiet justice set on the American frontier, where an unassuming old man faces cruelty without raising his voice or his hand. This dramatic narrative follows a forgotten life shaped by honor, memory, and an unseen bond that turns violence into silence and fear into reflection. Told in a cinematic voice rich with dust, wind, and moral tension, this story explores how true strength is revealed not through force, but through character and patience. Perfect for fans of Western stories who seek depth over gunfire, this narrative reminds listeners that the past never truly disappears, and that identity can shape fate in a single moment. If you are drawn to Western stories that challenge stereotypes, honor Indigenous presence, and show justice arriving without bloodshed, this is a journey worth taking. Designed for immersive listening, this story fits seamlessly among classic Western stories, while offering a human message that still resonates today, making it ideal for anyone who believes the most lasting Western stories are the ones that end in silence and meaning.